So Islam Makhachev, I thought he struck really well. And I have a few different questions for you in terms of maybe a second meeting down the line. Alexander Volkanovski seemingly suggested he needed to start faster. He had a hard time establishing his jab, I feel like, really throughout. But I do believe in a rematch that he would start faster and he would be more aggressive. And I mean, there's no denying that the betting line's obviously going to be a lot tighter in a rematch, even though Islam was still a huge favorite on the live number going into this fifth and final round. But what do you think about Volkanovski in terms of establishing his jab and being a little bit more aggressive, at least on the feet, were they to meet again?
Yeah, the problem with the jab, right, is that he does have longer arms, but you need to creep into a certain at a certain distance in order to land that, right? Obvious. The other thing about the jab is you need to be relatively straight on to your opponents. That's how a lot of MMA guys like to do it. I prefer to try to create an angle off of that. It is especially helpful if you have if you're in an open stance, right, where if you're in Volkanovski, who like to switch stances, could be in that open stance. I think it gives him an angle to land without getting countered. The problem is he was landing the jab, but Islam was countering straight back. If you are dead on to someone, it gives options for both fighters to land shots. And Islam, being the shorter guy, and Islam having been working on his striking, was able to return shots. And him having that size and weight advantage, it seemed like his shots were having a bit more of an impact on Volkanovski. Volkanovski was faster, but yeah, I think that it was a little troublesome. What I did like from Volkanovski was when he was shifting stances, it was confusing Islam a bit. Islam started to adjust to that, and when Islam started to adjust to that and he found his timing, I think it took away a bit of the confidence out of Volkanovski, who thought he was going to have a significant striking edge. It was an edge in some ways. I think that where Volkanovski was getting into trouble, I think, first of all, he underestimated Islam in the striking. He was staying in front of him, and when he was landing his shots, he wasn't hitting the proper exits, right? He wasn't hitting those, hitting the combination and getting out of there. He was hitting those shots and kind of waiting for Islam to do something and thinking he was going to be able to follow up, and Islam was on point with his timing and counter shots.
You're on point today. I try to not get too technical, as you know. But, right, like I used to sort of joke around, like in the time it takes Benson Henderson to fix his hair, he could throw a jab. In the time it takes Alexander Volkanovski to perpetually switch his stance, he could be throwing something. Yeah. More often than not, when you're switching stances, you're not throwing. So if you switch stances 75, 80, 90 times in a fight, I don't know. I just think that he will start faster in a rematch. And obviously, I would be fascinated to see it. I think there are a lot of people out there that think the pendulum would swing to Volkanovski in a rematch. I wonder if you think Makhachev would wrestle more or less in a rematch. And you and I are aligned that we thought Islam Makhachev won what was a very close fight here. But sometimes I like to ask guys in the fighter meeting, and I didn't get to it this time, if this was just a kickboxing match, right? We can talk all we want about your grappling and your wrestling and how nuanced it is and everything else, the trips, whatever. Yeah. But what if you just had to beat Alexander Volkanovski in a kickboxing match? I bet Islam would say, I think I can beat him, right? I'm the bigger man, I'm the more powerful man, right? Like, do you think Islam would wrestle more or less if they were to fight again?
That is a good question. I certainly think he proved that he's got the advantage there. Volkanovski did a great job, great account of himself, but Islam is going to have that edge. He really knows what he's doing in that clinch. He really knows what he's doing when he gets a hold of your legs. And yeah, it's very possible. I do think that he needed to use his striking more to set up his takedowns as opposed to just using his striking to just counter. Having those shots, I think, was better. He was taking advantage of Volkanovski with reactive takedowns. He would have Volkanovski, who got a little impatient there in round 2 when he came forward. He would change levels and then shoot in on him. So, yeah, I think there's stuff that he could do to be a little bit more proactive, setting up his takedowns, backing up Volkanovski, having those strikes lead the way, and then changing levels a little bit more. He did some of that, but I think he could do more of that for sure if they ever did a rematch, which I would be all for. I could watch those guys fight over and over again.
There were times where I thought Volkanovski had some momentary lapses in round 4. You heard me sort of acknowledge, not saying that that's why he got caught in that body triangle, but a little bit of the verbal back and forth at what I thought was an inopportune time. I also thought Volkanovski was quick to acknowledge the big shots that were landed by Islam Makhachev. Even if you go back and watch the first 3 minutes of round 5, Islam Makhachev won the first half of round 5, unless my eyes deceive me. When I went back and watched this morning, he cut him open with a big shot, because what I did this morning, and I don't like watching this shit back, right? But maybe I should, right? But obviously, this is such a huge part of my life that, heaven forbid I come home and actually watch the Super Bowl or something or be with my kids, right? But I did watch this thing back, and I found myself being like, all right, at the 3.5 minute mark of round 2, it's even. At the 3 minute mark, 2.5 minute mark, it's even. 2 minutes. Finally, I swung the pendulum to Islam Makhachev in round 2. Then I get to round 3, and the human in me thinks, well, man, even if I'm a judge, and by the way, I thought the judges did an exceptional job overall on this night, and a lot of the elite ones were in the building, Ben Cartledge among them. But I found myself saying, I'm a human being. Like, round 2 was close, Round 3, I did think was Volkanovski, right? But it was close as hell, too. And because I had just given Islam round 2, the human in me was going to give Volkanovski round 3. And I don't know. I know the judges aren't supposed to do that. Kenny, what would you say to people? And I know I'm a little bit all over the place. What would you say to people? Well, what do you think? Do you think I'm onto anything in terms of Volkanovski acknowledging those shots? Like, why would you give them further credence with your, like, yeah, good? Or am I just reading way too much into that?
100%. I was thrown off by it. I'm looking at him and he's like, hey, nice job. That was a nice shot. Where if he and he didn't stop, like, okay, what one big tell, if you get hit with a shot and you acknowledge it, that's going to let the judge know, right, that like that was a good shot. If he just had that poker face and stayed where he was, because he didn't get pushed back from some of those, some of them he did, but on a couple of them he'd get hit, he'd stay there and be like, nice, kind of give him a thumbs up. It's like, dude, don't do that. You're not sparring. And maybe that was a way of getting him to be energized and fired up, but it did not help his cause. There's no question about it. If he kind of didn't do anything and just kind of took one step forward and tried to throw right after that, I don't think it would have been as big of a deal. But if Islam's landing those shots and you're acknowledging them and you're saying good job, you're just helping the judges make it that much more easier to score, quote unquote, those shots.